The story begins in the bustling city of Lyon, France. It was the late 12th century, a time of great wealth and deep faith. A man named Valdez, often called Peter Waldo, was a very rich merchant. He had everything a person could want: a successful business, a beautiful home, a loving wife, and 2 daughters. But something stirred in his heart. One day, the story goes, Waldo heard a traveling singer perform a song about Saint Alexius. Alexius was the son of a wealthy Roman nobleman who gave up everything on his wedding night. The tale struck Waldo like a bolt of lightning. The singer's words painted a vivid picture of a man who chose God over gold, faith over fortune. So Peter Waldo made a decision that would send shockwaves through Lyon and eventually all of Europe. He resolved to give away his immense fortune. He provided a generous dowry for his wife and placed his 2 daughters in a convent, ensuring their care. Then he began to distribute the rest of his wealth to the poor. Waldo's dramatic act did not go unnoticed. Others were drawn to his example. Soon a group of followers gathered around him. They called themselves the Poor of Lyon. They embraced poverty not as a curse to be avoided, but as a spiritual blessing to be sought. They believed that by freeing themselves from worldly possessions, they could better focus on God. As the movement grew, it spread from Lyon into the surrounding regions. In northern Italy, a similar group had already formed, known as the Humiliati, or the Humbled Ones. This Italian branch of the movement became known as the Poor of Lombardy. They were often more organized, living in communities where they worked together and shared their resources. The core of the Waldensian way of life was a radical attempt to imitate Jesus and his apostles. Their leaders, known as Barbes, traveled with nothing but a simple robe and a copy of the scriptures. A central practice that set the Waldensians apart was their insistence on lay preaching. They believed that any person, man or woman, who felt called by God had the right to preach its message. This was a direct challenge to the authority of the Catholic Church, which held that only ordained priests could preach and interpret the scriptures. Their preachers went out 2 by 2, just as Jesus had sent out his disciples, to share the gospel in homes, marketplaces, and fields. Peter Waldo understood a fundamental truth. If people were to live by the Bible, they first had to understand it. He commissioned a monumental task: translating the New Testament into the local vernacular. This was an act of profound significance. It took the sacred text out of the exclusive hands of the clergy and placed it directly into the hands of the laity. For the first time, ordinary people could hear the words of Jesus, the letters of Paul, and the stories of the apostles spoken in their own tongue. Of course, this act was seen as deeply threatening by the Catholic hierarchy. An independent vernacular Bible was a challenge to their authority. In 1179, they took a bold step to gain official approval. 2 Waldensians traveled from Lyon all the way to Rome to attend the Third Lateran Council. The initial encounter was surprisingly positive. Pope Alexander III was reportedly impressed by their simplicity and piety and approved of their vow of poverty. However, the official church hierarchy were far more skeptical. They subjected the Waldensian representatives to a theological examination, questioning them on complex doctrines. The simple lay preachers were not trained in scholastic theology and struggled to answer the intricate questions. A chasm opened between their simple Bible-based faith and the complex theological structure of the church. They returned to Lyon and, in defiance of the council's ruling, continued to preach publicly. This act of disobedience marked a turning point. In 1184, Pope Lucius III issued a bull, Ad Abolendam, which officially excommunicated Peter Waldo and his followers. The door to reconciliation had been slammed shut. Driven from the cities and branded as heretics, the Waldensians were forced to adapt to survive. Their movement went underground, transforming into a hidden church. They developed a network of safe houses and secret meeting places, often in the homes of sympathetic artisans or in remote farmhouses and mountain barns. At the heart of this underground network were the traveling preachers, the Barbes. They traveled constantly, always in pairs, disguised as merchants, peddlers, or craftsmen. Their arrival in a community was a major event. They would stay for a few days, preaching, teaching, hearing confessions, and administering the sacraments in secret. Life for an ordinary Waldensian believer was a delicate balance of outward conformity and inward dissent. To their Catholic neighbors, they appeared to be normal members of the parish. But secretly, they held to their own beliefs and practices. They would quietly reject the priest's sermon in their hearts, later discussing the true meaning of Scripture with a visiting Barbet. Once excommunicated, the Waldensians became targets of systematic persecution. The newly established papal inquisition saw the Waldensians as one of its primary enemies. Those who were found guilty and refused to recant faced grim punishments. They were handed over to the secular government to be burned at the stake, a public spectacle designed to terrify others. The persecution was not limited to the Inquisition. The Waldensians faced waves of violent military attacks, especially in the remote Alpine valleys where they had established strong communities. One of the most infamous episodes occurred during the Easter of 1655. The Duke of Savoy ordered his troops to demand conversion to Catholicism. When they refused, the soldiers unleashed a horrific massacre. Despite this unrelenting violence, the Waldensians demonstrated incredible resilience. Their communities in the high, inaccessible valleys provided a degree of protection, creating natural fortresses. Their faith, forged in secrecy and hardship, gave them the strength to endure. They saw their suffering as a sign that they were the true church, walking the same path of persecution as the early Christians. In the 16th century, everything changed. News of Martin Luther and John Calvin began to trickle into their remote Alpine valleys. They heard of a massive religious upheaval challenging papal authority. This encounter culminated in 1532 at the Synod of Chanforan. The Waldensian leaders made a momentous decision to formally align their movement with the Swiss Reformation. In a remarkable episode known as the Glorious Return of 1689, 900 exiled Waldensians, led by Pastor Henry Arnaud, fought their way back across the Alps to their native valleys. Finally, in 1848, King Charles Albert issued the Edict of Emancipation, granting the Waldensians civil and religious rights. After nearly 700 years of persecution, they were at last free. Today, the historic heartland of the Waldensian Church remains in the Cottian Alps of Piedmont, Italy, centered around Torre Pellice. This small but vibrant community maintains its own churches and institutions. However, the Waldensian legacy has spread far beyond these valleys. Significant congregations can be found in Uruguay, Argentina, and the United States, particularly in North Carolina. The Waldensian story is a powerful testament to the resilience of faith. For centuries they were sustained by a simple, radical idea that the Bible should be the guide for every aspect of life. Their legacy helped shape the course of Western Christianity.